Welcome to Grief Observed. I'm Pastor Stephen Hare, and I'm filling in today for Chaplain Kevin Weaver. Today on the show, I have a special guest, Rose Weaver, and she's here to talk about some of the challenges that we face in life. And I'll tell you a little bit about Rose. It was my privilege to meet Rose probably over a year ago as we needed some care for my mom, who passed away this past summer, and Rose provided some in-home care that my mom needed. Was a tremendous blessing. But Rose has her own story. She came here from England as a little girl, was put into the U.S. foster system as a teenager. She would meet her father for the very first time when she was 18, and recently reconciled with her mother and was her mother's caregiver at the end of life, and her mom passed away somewhat recently as well. And our extra special guest with Rose today is Roxanne, and this is one of Rose's children, and she's here to support Mom and offer some words of wisdom today as well. So Rose, maybe a good way to start is to tell us a little bit about your journey from England to the United States, and maybe how circumstances evolved to where you ended up in the United States foster system.
So my mom and I came over here when I was 13. She actually came over here to just meet somebody, to try to have a companion. And my mother and I were best friends when we first moved over here. When I was about 14 or 15, she met a man, and they got married. I was at Blue Ridge School, and apparently it was just too much for my mom to handle me as a teenager. I wasn't doing like horrible things, but I guess when you're focused on your marriage, sometimes a teenager can get in the middle of it. So I got put into the system as a foster child right before I turned 16. When I turned 17, I actually reached out to my dad on Facebook because my mom told me his name. I'm not sure if anybody's ever had to go through Facebook to meet their parent for the first time, but it worked out great. My dad came over here right before I turned 18, and we did a DNA test and everything else, and he went home and we got the test results, and ever since then it's been like I've known him my whole life.
So you have a good relationship with your father now?
Yes.
And he's back in England?
Right, he comes over here once a year. Since my mom passed away 3 months ago, he's going to start coming more often.
Very nice.
Yeah, so he's actually going to be here next month for my next journey. But
Facebook, I think, has helped introduce a lot of children to parents, parents to children, and siblings to one another. It's kind of exciting. Yeah. That part of it is very interesting. So when you came over to the United States and you were here in the White Mountains and you were going to school at Blue Ridge, and so your mom remarried and things weren't working out, and then when you were placed into the foster system, what were some of the challenges, or do you remember, were you angry? Were you sad? What were some of the emotions that you went through when that was happening in your life as a teenager?
It was just very hard on me because we were best friends, and then she met her husband and things just fell apart because her husband and I didn't get along. And to this day, it makes a lot more sense to me as to why we don't get along.
Okay.
So, so my mom's gone, and we have no relationship now. So
this man came in, interfered, or basically came between you and your best friend, and they got married, and things were a lot different at home, and so then you went into the foster system, and then you found your father.
Yep.
And he came over and met you, and were you still in high school then, or were you out of high school?
No, I had graduated.
Okay.
And my husband, Japheth, and I were dating back then.
Okay.
And so he got to meet my dad and asked my dad to marry me. It was perfect. And so my dad actually got to walk me down the aisle at one of our weddings, and that was the thing that you've always wanted. So I thought that I would never have
Little
it.
girls dream to have daddy
Yep.
walk her down the aisle and give her away to Japheth, your husband, and that's
Yep.
neat.
Yeah.
And you didn't know who your father was this whole time until you were 17
Yes.
and in the foster system.
Right.
And that's losing your best friend, your mom. That's a loss, and that's the type of grief we go through. And then you met your father, and it sounds like a really great relationship that's just grown through
Yeah.
these years.
And then about a year and a half before my mom passed away, I think this is one of the hardest parts, is her husband decided that he wanted to be with a young person, not with a sick woman.
Yeah.
And so I got my best friend back. It was hard.
Was your mom living here at that time, or did she come back to the White Mountains?
She moved away to Tennessee,
Okay.
and he was a truck driver. And her friend Mary actually drove her all the way back here from Tennessee
Yep.
to bring her home with us.
And
So-
she came back, and she was sick.
Yeah,
Um,
COPD.
Not real sure how sick she was, or
Yeah, she got put on hospice the day that she came home.
okay.
So, I don't know, we thought that we were just going to have her for a short time, and we ended up having her for a year and a half. So, it's a long time, sometimes harder than others. But
What was it like to reconcile with your mom after this drought and estrangement?
I mean, when it's your mom, you don't care what you've been through.
Okay.
You just become best friends again. So, you know, she got married and then we fell apart. But as soon as, you know, she needed me, it was like nothing ever happened. We were best friends again.
And she lived in your home, I think, for part of
Yes.
the time.
She lived in my home for about a year and a half. She moved out on Friday because she didn't want us to watch her suffer. So she went into Shoal Haven until Monday. And then on Monday, she moved in with my mother and father-in-law, Tammy and Kevin. Tammy, she's just been awesome.
Because your mom was in your home, you had the hospital bed and the concentrator, and of course you're going around normal life, and which is a whole lot different.
My favorite part about my mom living with me is I would clean the kitchen, and she was addicted to coffee. So she would wake up, she would go get her coffee, but she would shake because of COPD. You know, you can't breathe, and it's really hard to hold on to things. And she would go and get a cup of coffee, and there would be sugar and creamer all over my counter. And then there would be like a trail of coffee all the way to her bed. So I have the good memories, like, that used to frustrate me. They were like, clean it up! But now I wish that I had to clean up after her, you know? I wish that she was still here.
I'm glad you said that. A lot of times there are things that frustrate us when people are alive, and yet they become precious memories. And it's good for people to hear that, because I think it's encouraging.
Yeah.
And then there's many times there's guilt. You know, I was impatient, I was upset, I was angry. Never necessarily expressed it, but a lot of times when people go through the loss of a parent or a spouse or whatever, you know, because it's difficult. It's difficult. Life isn't normal. It's a new normal. And you have, how many children do you and Japheth have?
We have 3 children.
Okay. And when you're around them, it seems like there's 6 of them. They're very energetic and full of life, and terrific, wonderful, beautiful set of children. And so those frustrations that you had with your mom and your home are kind of precious memories that are indelibly marked on your heart now and your family, no doubt.
Right. The kids were there when my mom was passing away. And I think the most perfect part that I can tell people is don't exclude your children from the last days because you're afraid they're going to remember this, or that something's going to happen and it's going to make them afraid. Because she's 5 years old, and it was perfect. She was right there holding Grandma's hand. I had a 1.5-year-old who was sitting on grandma's bed, just touching grandma. You know, my mom, during the last like 3 hours, she opened up her eyes and she looked at her and grabbed her hand and told her that she loves her. So I think it's good to include your children so that if they ever see it, they're not afraid of it. You know, it's normal. It's life.
It is normal, and I'm glad you said that. In America, it's not normal.
Oh.
Americans, Western culture, but Americans especially, treat death like a disease. We don't talk about it. We don't plan for it. We think we're protecting our children from it, and I think what you just shared was very important. A lot of parents aren't sure how to deal with that, and it's very healthy. Generally, you let the children make the decision, and they want to be there, and they say odd things or funny things, and touching or kissing. Or I know my boys, when our two oldest boys, when grandma passed away, and we're telling them we're going to go to a viewing and explaining that, the casket, and our boys were maybe 5 and 3, more or less, and we went up to the casket and lifted them up, and our oldest boy, who's in the Army, said, "She's got a head." And of course, Nancy and I are wondering what in the world is going through this boy's mind. And he thought that to die meant that you lost your head, and so he was expecting to see grandma without a head in the casket. And it just, you know, and then touching her body and kissing her, and then asking, you know, we don't think the same way, but it's very, very healthy. And I'll use a personal testimony. My granddad passed away when I was 5, and I wasn't allowed to go to the funeral, and that's always been a sore spot with me, and because I lived with him for a couple of years, and you know, he and my nana raised me for part of that time, and so I learned from that children ought to be given the opportunity to go, and not forced, because it helps them understand life and death. But it's a very American thing in particular when you look around the world at their approach toward death. And so, Roxanne, you loved your grandmother very much.
Grandma Jenny? Do you miss her?
And
she's shy.
And she held your hand. She held your hand and said that she loved you just shortly before she passed away. Well, that's a great testimony. Rose has and I appreciate you being here and being open and honest and transparent. I think it's very helpful, and I know it's a blessing to me. And there's some exciting things in your life have been taking place, transpiring for the last several months, and it has to do with surrogacy. And perhaps you can tell us a little bit about surrogacy. And before Rose shares, one of the things when we talk about grief, there's 3 pieces of wisdom that someone shared with me with regard to grief, and I think it's important to repeat these often. One is to encourage people to respond to the grief. Again, and especially in America, people think the best thing to do is get busy, ignore it, don't think about it, which the opposite is true. We must respond to it. However one responds, everyone responds differently. And the second part of that is remembering those messes, the sugar, the cream, you know, and you would give anything to clean up that mess one more time. Remembering, and Roxanne, as you grow older, remembering that special time when your grandma held your hand and said, "I loved you." And so we respond to grief, we remember, and those memories, some of them that were frustrating at the time, become special and sweet. And then the third part is rebuild. As we go on, we say goodbye to those as they have died and have passed away, but our life continues on. And the goal is to live life significantly. And for a lot of people, when they go through a time of loss, they think of that as the end. And the loss could be going into a foster system, losing your best friend, your mom, or we begin to experience loss early in life, a stolen bicycle, things like that. But how do we go on living significantly when someone we're very close to passes away? And that's the goal, is not just to live, but to live significantly, to make a difference with however many days that we have. And you have been involved in a surrogacy plan for some time, and this is coming to fruition in the near future. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what drew you into that, and whatever you feel appropriate that you can share, I think would be a blessing for others.
So for me, my children have always been my everything. You know, you have your husband, you have your parents, you know, but children have always brought, you know, the light to my life. I've always wanted to be a mom. So when I think of other people that can't have children, it really touches me. So I actually met a local person who couldn't have children, and I offered to carry for them, and they ended up adopting. Adoption's great. So from there, they had their baby. They had their happiness. So for me, I went out and I searched. I wasn't content, you know, just knowing that I didn't help somebody. So I went out and I searched, and I did a lot of research, and I found an agency who does surrogacy. So that was back in February of 2018. So,
for those who aren't real familiar with this, could you? How does you sought out the opportunity to be a surrogate mother? Okay, and there must be some agencies that help make this happen.
yes,
Okay, and so you connected with them.
right.
All right, and then what's the process? I know there's some legal things that you have to, some hoops you have to jump through, and can you speak a little bit to that?
So the first thing that you have to do is medical clearance. So it's a lot of work, but long story short, you just give them your medical records, your hospital records, your baby's records, and then you have to go. I had to fly out to California to a special IVF doctor who did their own personal exam and blood work, and then you get cleared by that doctor. That's the IVF doctor who's going to be implanting, you know, another couple's baby. And so they have to make sure that your body is good to do all of that before you can even start looking for another couple to carry for.
And how much did your childhood and the way that you raised your relationship with your mom, and then losing that, not knowing your father, not knowing who your father was, and meeting him at 18, that time of estrangement with your mom, you know, how much do you think that played into where you are now, and you're going to carry the baby for a couple that can't have a baby, so you can provide them the joy of a child?
Right, and I think that it played in a lot with it, because I don't know how to explain it. I just want to have other people feel the joy of having a family together and experiencing that. So when I first made my profile, you know, you have to send in pictures of your family and you and everything, and you have to answer like 1,000 questions. But one of the biggest things for me with surrogacy is it's not an easy thing to get into. But once I did medical, and once I got sent profiles of people that were interested in us as surrogates, it kind of just all falls into place from there. So my couple is international, and they've been trying for years to have a child, and it's just never worked out because of her medical condition. I go on January 22nd to California, and I get a little girl implanted. So it takes a lot of shots and medications and body preparation. But in the end, to me, it's all worth it.
And it's worth it because you're going to provide a precious life to a couple who otherwise would not have the joy of raising a child. And you said a daughter.
Yes.
Okay.
So the cool thing about surrogacy is they make the embryo, and before they insert the embryo into the surrogate, they have to test it for gene mutations. Some parents want to know the gender, and in this case, my intended parents wanted to know the gender.
Well, that's important, whether to paint the nursery blue or pink or...
You could have found out in 20 weeks.
Yeah,
but,
well,
but
we're impatient. Yeah, we want to know now. Oh,
yeah,
that's fascinating, and I think very commendable for you to do that. So what did Japheth say when you began to talk about this idea of surrogacy? I don't know if it's something you guys had talked about a long time ago, or...
Yeah, so before we had our youngest daughter, Xylee, we had talked about surrogacy. So almost 3 years ago. And then we were like, hold on, you know, it's not going to work out right now. We ended up having another child. And then I actually have a friend who reached out to me again, and she was like, hey, I think that it's time. You know, everything looks like it would be a good time to do this. And so I got back into it. And now we have transfer dates. We are already done with legal. You have to go through a legal process just in case.
I can't even imagine what that has to be like, or even the medical stuff, to feel, you know, almost like a lab rat, forgive me.
Yeah, I have to drive.
Getting all this stuff in line.
Yeah, I have to drive back and forth from the valley often to do blood work and ultrasounds and everything.
So most of the monitoring will be done down in Phoenix.
Yes.
Okay, and then is that where you'll give birth then?
No, I'll give birth at the Shola Summit Healthcare. Okay. And then the parents will be there.
Well, exciting that the White Mountains get to be part of that, and this international couple will be coming here to receive this marvelous, wonderful gift that you're providing them. In the course of these exciting things and the holiday seasons, the season that's upon us, halfway through it now, and the new year that we're in, by the time we air this, it'll be 2019. With the recent loss of your mom, how has that played into it? Are there moments of unexpected grief? You get kind of sabotaged once in a while, or
there's a lot. You don't know when you're going to have grief, and I think that it was Thanksgiving that was really hard for me. I think it was because it was the first, you know, holiday without her. But yeah, it just comes, and then you're down, but you know, you get through it. I went to a hospice compasses event for people who had lost their loved ones this year, and they had a perfect saying on the back of their cards. I wish that I would have bought it. Something about light a candle and watch it dance, and you know, just think of your mom or think of your loved ones dancing when you watch the candle. So I actually have my mom's remains on a shelf in my house because that's where she wanted to be. So I have her on a shelf, and then my mother-in-law for Christmas printed it out and put it in a frame for me, and then I have candles next to it. So when I'm feeling down, I always have that to go to. So you just find ways to handle your grief.
What's been particularly helpful? Is there a thought? You shared a little bit about the service you went to, that Compassus sponsored, and the theme with the candle and the light. And what particularly has helped you at these moments of grief to, some people would say, recover, or maybe just kind of resume, you know, get back to doing the things you need to do? Anything in particular?
So when my mom had passed away, I have a blessings jar in my kitchen. And then I sat down at my table and I just wrote like things that really were amazing to me during that time. And so I just wrote them down and I folded them in half and I put them in the blessings jar. So when I'm feeling really down and like I need something to pick me up, I go back to that jar and I just read those papers. So for instance, one of them is about the night that my mom passed away. We were in our vehicle on our way home, and Roxanne, the one that was sitting here, and Jackson, he's my 4-year-old son, Roxanne looked at Jackson and said something across the lines of, look, there's Grandma up in heaven in the sky, and she's with Grammy and God. And so those are the things that I get to read, and you know, my kids are in there, my kids are here. My kids know about God, my kids know that Grandma's in heaven, you know, with Grammy, and it all ties together, and it always will be there. My kids won't forget it. And so I look at my kids and I get reminded.
Have a lasting memory, and Roxanne took off. I think she wanted to go be with Grandma.
Yeah.
And abandon us for a few minutes. And maybe the last thought, Rose, so if I understand it right, you have a jar.
Yes.
You call it the blessing jar.
Yes.
And what you've done is written on pieces of paper some memories of your mom.
Yes.
Some thoughts, and the children also, just things have happened, things that were said, and you put it into this jar, and as they come to mind, you write it, put it in the jar.
Right.
And then sometimes when you're going through a difficult time, you'll pull one of those out or start pulling some of those out and reading them.
Right.
And find some encouragement and hope.
Yep.
And
just like the coffee. When she passed away, there was coffee on my ceiling because she would come in sometimes and like just throw her coffee. She didn't really throw her coffee, but she would trip or something or lose balance, and her coffee would go down and all over the walls and the ceilings. So, I mean, obviously we've cleaned them, but there's always those memories, and they're in your home, and they're in your heart, and so you're never going to forget that. That's why I wanted my mom home with me when she passed away, is because we need those memories. So it helps a lot.
And your mom lived with you and Japheth and the children in your home for well over a year on hospice care, I believe, right?
Right.
And then at the very, very end, she was with your in-laws.
Right.
And the children were there when she passed away.
Yep.
And anything that you would do different, or anything that you wish you had done that you didn't?
Just, she always wanted to hug me and tell me that she loves me. And I would just get annoyed and be like, okay, Mom, like, I love you, stop, you know. Because I never wanted her to go, so I never wanted to leave, and I never wanted to, you know, hug all the time, and I love you, I love you, I love you. But right before she did pass away, that did happen, and she reached out for me, and she looked at me, and we just said, I love you, like 10 times. And then that's when she looked to Roxanne and grabbed her hand and told her that she loved her. So it's beautiful.
I think there's no better way to end our time than to the reminder, you can never say I love you too much, and so take opportunity while you have it. Thank you for watching Grief Observed. I'm Pastor Stephen Hare, filling in for Kevin Weaver, and I would like to thank again our guest, Rose Weaver, for sharing her heartwarming story, and we will see you again. Thank you for tuning in.